Long, long ago, in the tall, smoky mountains of a land called Oldoria, there lived a young dragon named Ember. He had shiny green scales, a pair of bright golden eyes, and two small wings that were just big enough to fly from one mountain peak to another. Now, in Oldoria, dragons were supposed to do dragon things. They were supposed to roar so loudly that the ground shook. They were supposed to breathe long, blazing rivers of fire that turned boulders into puddles of melted rock. They were supposed to stomp through forests, collect mountains of gold coins, and make every knight, farmer, and sheep in the kingdom run away screaming. And most dragons in Oldoria did exactly that, with great pride and terrific enthusiasm. But Ember was different. Ember loved books. It had started 2 years ago, when a merchant's cart had overturned at the bottom of the mountain. Among the spilled vegetables, broken pots, and scattered coins, Ember had found something he had never seen before, a small, rectangular object with strange markings on every page. His friend Crag, a thick grey dragon with a voice like thunder, had sniffed it and sneezed. "It smells like old trees," Crag had said, unimpressed. But Ember had picked it up gently with his claws and stared at the mysterious markings. Something about them called to him, like a tiny door inside his chest was begging to be opened. Lizard Ember, whispering to himself, "What are you, little thing? What are all these little symbols trying to tell me?" He had carried the book home to his cave and spent 3 whole days staring at those markings. He flew down to the village at the bottom of the mountain and peered through windows until he found a schoolhouse. He listened to the teacher carefully, peeking through the tiny window every single day, secretly learning to read the human alphabet, 1 letter at a time. It took him 4 weeks. 4 incredible, amazing, mind-blowing weeks. And then, one rainy Tuesday morning, something magical happened. The symbols on the page turned into words. The words turned into sentences. And the sentences turned into something so wonderful that Ember forgot to breathe his fire for 3 whole days. Open book. The book was called The Adventures of Captain Silverwind and the Sky Pirates of the East. It was the most wonderful thing Ember had ever experienced in his entire dragon life. From that day on, Ember wanted more books. He began trading with the villagers, a small pile of the gold coins his family had collected, in exchange for whatever books the village bookshop had available. The kind old bookshop owner, a white-haired woman named Madame Figaro, was absolutely delighted to have such an eager customer. She didn't even mind that he was a dragon. Older woman Madame Figaro. Orider ish orider, young Ember. And a customer is a customer. Come in, mind your tail near the shelves. Soon, Ember's cave was full of books. Towers of them, piled to the ceiling. Books about faraway kingdoms and deep ocean creatures. Books about how to grow purple flowers that only bloomed at midnight. Books about the history of stars. Books about brave young children who went on impossible adventures. Books about magic spells and recipes for invisible soup and the proper way to say hello in 30 different languages. He read every single one. And with every book, Ember's mind grew bigger and bigger and bigger, until he felt like his golden eyes could see things no other dragon in Oldoria had ever seen. But the other dragons were not impressed. Not even a little bit. Dragonface Crag, snorting fire. Books are for humans. Dragons burn things, we don't read them. What's wrong with you, Ember? Dragonface Torch, the biggest dragon in the mountains. I heard Ember spent all morning reading a book about flowers. Flowers? Ha! What a waste of perfectly good fire-breathing time. Every night, the dragons would gather around the great volcano and share stories of the things they had stomped on or set on fire that day. And every night, Ember would sit quietly at the edge of the group, secretly wishing he could tell them about the amazing things he had read, about how the ocean has mountains taller than anything in Oldoria, or about how some stars are so big they could swallow 1,000 worlds, or about how a tiny seed no bigger than a claw tip could grow into the tallest tree in the forest. But he knew they would just laugh. So he kept his books. And he kept reading. And every night, when all the other dragons were snoring loudly in their caves, Ember sat by the light of his own small flame and turned another page. He was perfectly happy. Until the day everything changed. One stormy afternoon, as Ember was rearranging his book towers by color, he had just finished reading a book about organization, and it had seemed like excellent advice. The ancient dragon elder, Grandmother Ashwing, appeared at the entrance of his cave. Grandmother Ashwing was the oldest dragon in all of Oldoria. She had purple-grey scales like rain clouds and eyes like 2 small moons, and she had lived so long that the other mountains respected her the way mountains respect earthquakes, quietly and with great nervousness. She peered into Ember's cave with those enormous moon eyes, and for a long time she said nothing at all. Older man grandmother Ashwing. So it's true. You are the one who reads. Sharkanya Ember, nervously. Yes. I hope that's all right. I know the others think it's. Older man grandmother Ashwing. Sit down, young Ember. I have something to tell you that no other dragon in these mountains knows. But first, show me your books. Ember watched with wide eyes as the great elder walked slowly through his cave, running one ancient claw across the spines of his books. Every now and then she would pause, tilt her enormous head, and make a sound like distant thunder, which, Ember had learned, was how very old dragons hummed thoughtfully. Finally, she turned to face him. Older man grandmother Ashwing. Ember, hidden deep in the crystal forest, past the whispering ravine and beyond the valley of frozen stars, there exists a library. The most wonderful library that has ever existed in this world, or any other. Sharkanyamber. A library? How big? Older man grandmother Ashwing. So big that if you started reading every book on its shelves today, and read 10 books a day, every single day without stopping, you would finish reading in approximately 3,700 years. Ember's golden eyes went so wide that he looked like he might float right off the ground from pure amazement. Classical building. It is called the Library of All Stories, said Grandmother Ashwing softly. It contains every story ever written, every fact ever discovered, and every wonder ever imagined. But it has been locked for 400 years. The key of reading was hidden away, and no one has been able to open it since. Sharkanyamber. Why was it locked? What happened? Older man grandmother Ashwing. Because the dragon who protected it, the great reader, the keeper of the library, was taken by the shadow serpent, Mordrak. Mordrak hates knowledge. He hates stories. He believes that those who read too much become too clever, too brave, too free, and free creatures are harder to frighten. So he stole the keeper away and hid the key, and for 400 years, the library has stood dark and silent and locked. A long silence filled Ember's book-crowded cave. Sharkanyamber, quietly. Where is the key? Older man grandmother Ashwing, looking at him steadily. That, my young reader, is the quest. The key was broken into 3 pieces and scattered across the 3 most dangerous places in Oldoria. But according to the ancient texts, which I have been keeping safe for a very long time, only a dragon who truly loves reading, who understands the real power of stories, can find all 3 pieces and unlock the library again. She extended one ancient claw and placed a small scroll in Ember's hands. It was old and golden and smelled of something wonderful, like sunshine and old paper and adventure all at once. Older man grandmother Ashwing. The choice is yours, Ember. But I have watched you for 2 years. And I believe you are ready. Ember looked down at the scroll. Then he looked up at his towers of beloved books. Then he looked out of his cave at the wide, wild, beautiful world outside. He opened the scroll. He read the first line. And just like that, the adventure began. The scroll told Ember that the first piece of the key was hidden in the Forest of Forgetting, a great tangled woodland where, if you wandered in without a plan, you would forget your name, your home, and your reason for being there. Many brave knights had gone in over the centuries. None had ever come back out. Ember flew there in 2 days, sleeping on a cloud each night. He had read about this technique in a book called Cloud Napping for Winged Creatures, and it worked beautifully. He arrived at the edge of the forest at dawn. The trees were so tall that their tops disappeared into a layer of silver mist. The forest floor was so dark that even the birds flew around it, not through it. And drifting out between the tree trunks was a thick, sweet-smelling fog that made Ember feel immediately sleepy and slightly forgetful of what his own name was. He had almost flapped his wings and turned around in defeat when he heard a small, squeaky voice from behind a tree root. Foxface small voice. Don't breathe it in. The fog. Hold your breath and breathe fire. Fire burns away the forgetting. Ember spun around. Peering up at him from behind a large mushroom was the smallest, most orange fox he had ever seen. She had enormous ears, a bushy tail with a white tip, and a tiny satchel over her shoulder that was absolutely stuffed with pieces of rolled-up paper. Sharkanyamber. Who are you? Foxface Fox. My name is Pip. I'm a map maker. Well, I'm trying to be a map maker. I came to map the forest of forgetting, but I forgot what I was mapping almost immediately, and then I forgot which direction was out, and I've been hiding behind this mushroom for 6 days. Are you here to rescue me? Şarkanyamber. I'm actually here to find a piece of a magical key hidden somewhere in this forest. Foxface Pip. Oh. I saw something shiny deep in the middle. I tried to get to it, but I forgot where it was before I could reach it. But I drew a map, half a map, before I forgot everything. Does that help? Ember looked at Pip, then at the fog drifting from the dark trees, then back at Pip's little satchel full of maps. Şarkanyamber. I think, he said slowly, that we are going to be extremely useful to each other. They made a plan. Ember would breathe fire in small controlled puffs, clearing the forgetful fog from the air around them as they walked. Pip would read her half-finished map and add to it as they went, drawing every turn in her notebook so they could never truly get lost. It was exactly the kind of plan that worked perfectly in books, and, as it turned out, it also worked perfectly in real life. As they walked deeper into the forest, the trees whispered strange, sleepy things in an ancient language. Ember recognized the language. He had read about it in a book called Old Forest Tongues, a beginner's guide. Dragon Ember, to Pip, translating. The trees are saying, go back, little visitor, what you seek will make you cry. But the book I read about ancient forest language said that old forest warnings always mean the opposite. They say cry when they mean rejoice. Foxface Pip. You can speak Old Forest? How did you learn that? Şarkanyamber, smiling. I read a book about it. Pip stared at him with her huge ears completely upright. I think, she said very seriously, that you might be the most useful dragon who has ever lived. In the very heart of the forest, they found it, a small clearing where a single beam of golden sunlight fell from above, and in the middle of that beam, resting on a mossy stone, was a piece of crystal that glowed like a tiny star. The first piece of the key. As Ember picked it up, the fog in the entire forest seemed to shudder, and then, slowly, it began to thin. The trees stopped whispering. Birds, who had avoided the forest for 100 years, landed on the branches and began singing. Foxface Pip, softly. You did it, Ember. Şarkanyamber. We did it. Your map got us here. And you told me about the fire trick. I couldn't have done this alone. Pip beamed the way only very small foxes can, with her whole face and both ears at once. Foxface Pip. I'm coming with you, you know. I want to see this library of all stories. I have a lot of things I need to map. Ember laughed, a warm, crackly sound like a happy campfire, and Pip climbed up onto his back between his wings, arranging her satchel of maps comfortably, and together they flew up out of the forest of forgetting into the bright blue sky above. The scroll told them the second piece of the key was guarded by the Riddlemaster, an ancient creature who lived deep inside a cave in the mountain of black stone. The Riddlemaster never fought with claws or fire. He fought with questions. And anyone who could not answer his riddles correctly was turned into a stone statue and added to his collection. According to Grandmother Ashwing's notes at the bottom of the scroll, the cave entrance alone was lined with 47 stone statues, all of them brave, capable, intelligent creatures who had tried and failed over the years. Foxface Pip, reading the scroll over Ember's shoulder. 47 statues. That is not a great success rate. Dragon Ember, thinking. We'll be all right. I've read 4 books about riddles. 3 about logic puzzles. 2 about ancient guessing games. And 1 very excellent book called Every Riddle Ever Invented, Volume 1 through 7. Foxface Pip. There are 7 volumes of riddles? Şarkanyamber. They were wonderful. I read them twice. The cave was exactly as described, dark, enormous, and lined on both sides with stone statues wearing expressions of deep frustration. A knight holding a sword. A wizard with his hands raised. A very confused-looking giant. In the middle of the cave, surrounded by the soft glow of blue fire, sat the Riddlemaster. He looked like a very large toad wearing a magnificent purple hat, with eyes that glowed like lanterns and fingers that tapped against each other constantly, as if they were counting something invisible. Riddlemaster, booming voice. Ah, a dragon. How delightful. I haven't had a dragon in years. Are you ready? 3 riddles. Answer them all correctly, and you may take the piece of the key. Get even any wrong, and you will join my collection. You may see positions 48 and 49 are already pre-arranged for a dragon and a fox. Sharkan ember, Kermli. We are ready. But I have a condition. If we answer all three correctly, you have to free one of the statues of your choice. Pick any one. The Riddlemaster's lantern eyes flickered with surprise. No challenger had ever added a condition before. Riddlemaster. Agreed. Now, Riddle 1. The three riddles of the Riddlemaster. Riddle 1. I have cities, but no houses live in me. I have mountains, but no snow. I have water, but no fish ever swim. I have roads, but no cars ever drive. What am I? Riddle 2. The more you take from me, the bigger I become. The more you fill me, the smaller I grow. What am I? Riddle 3. I speak without a mouth. I hear without ears. I have no body, but I come alive in wind. I hold entire worlds inside me, yet you can carry me in one hand. What am I? Ember answered without hesitating even once. Sharkan ember. A map, a hole, and a book. Silence fell over the cave. Even the blue fire seemed to hold its breath. The Riddlemaster stared at Ember with his enormous lantern eyes for a very long time. Riddlemaster, very quietly. Correct. All three. How? Sharkan ember. I read a lot of books, including 7 volumes of riddles. Something strange happened then. The Riddlemaster, who had not smiled in 400 years, smiled a small, rusty smile. He reached beneath his purple hat and pulled out the second piece of the key, which blazed with warm golden light the moment Ember touched it. Then, true to his word, the Riddlemaster snapped his fingers and one of the stone statues shimmered, glowed, and became a very confused-looking wizard who blinked around at the cave in great bewilderment. The third piece of the key was the most dangerous of all. It was not hidden in a forest or guarded by a Riddlemaster. It was held by Mordrak himself, the Shadow Serpent, the creature who had locked the library in the first place 400 years ago. Mordrak lived in the Obsidian Palace at the edge of the world, where the sky turned the color of old bruises and the clouds moved in shapes that looked like grasping hands. Pip looked at the palace from a safe distance and made a very small sound. Foxface Pip. I am going to need a lot more map paper for this. Mordrak was not a fighter. He was something more dangerous, a deceiver. When they approached his gates, he was waiting for them, draped in shadows like a coat of dark smoke, his eyes 2 pale flames in the dark. Snake Mordrak, smooth and cold. A little dragon who reads books. How sweet. How completely, utterly useless. Do you know what books are, little dragon? They are lies. Stories that make you think the world is more wonderful than it is. Stories that make creatures believe they are special, when really they are nothing at all. Sharkan ember. You're wrong. Books aren't lies. They're the truest things that exist. Snake Mordrak. Then prove it. I propose a contest. You tell me one story, the best story you know, and I will tell you one. We will let the mountains themselves judge. If your story moves the world, you get the piece. If mine does, you stay here. Forever. Ember and Pip exchanged a look. There was a long moment of silence. And then Ember sat down, folded his wings, took a slow, deep breath, and began to tell a story. He did not tell an exciting adventure story. He did not tell a story full of battles and fire. He told the quietest, most honest story he knew, a story about a small dragon who nobody understood, who sat alone in a cave with towers of books, who learned about the world through pages when the world itself felt too big and confusing. A dragon who discovered that every book was a friend. That every story was a door into someone else's heart. That reading meant you were never truly alone, because somewhere in every book, someone understood exactly how you felt. He told them about Madame Figaro and her kindness, about Pip and her enormous ears and her half-finished map, about the Riddlemaster's rusty smile, about Grandmother Ashwing walking through his cave and touching the spines of his books with one ancient claw. He told a story about why stories matter. And as he spoke, the strangest things began to happen. The bruise-colored sky above the Obsidian Palace lightened, first to grey, then to pale pink, then slowly to blue. The grasping cloud shapes let go and drifted apart. The cold stone of the palace walls began to feel slightly warmer. And somewhere very distant, like something underground waking up after long sleep, The mountains rumbled, a sound not of earthquake or anger, but of something like recognition. Like yes. Yes, that is true. Mordrak tried to tell his story, a cold, sneering tale about how nothing meant anything and stories were just noise. But as he spoke, his voice kept becoming quieter, and the sky kept getting bluer, and even the shadow serpent himself seemed to be shrinking slightly, as though Ember's story had taken up all the room in the air and left nowhere for darkness to stand. When both stories were done, the silence was complete. Then one mountain peak glowed gold. Then another. Then 5 more. Snake Mordrak, after a very long pause, in a voice very different from before, quieter, older, somehow sad. I had forgotten what stories could do. I was afraid of them, once. Because a story made me feel something I did not wish to feel, long ago. And I decided it was safer to lock all of them away. But that was wrong. Wasn't it? It was not a question. It was a realization. Mordrak reached into the shadows around him and brought out the third piece of the key. It blazed brighter than the other two combined. He held it out to Ember. The library of all stories stood in the crystal forest exactly as Grandmother Ashwing had described. Enormous, magnificent, and completely silent. Its walls were made of white stone that shimmered faintly like mother of pearl. Its windows were as tall as houses. Hundreds of steps led up to 2 great doors carved with images of every creature who had ever lived. Dragons, foxes, humans, giants, mermaids, birds, and things that had no name, all of them reading. The doors had 3 locks, each shaped like a piece of a broken crystal star. Ember held up the 3 pieces of the key. They floated gently from his claws, drifted together in the air, and reconnected. Snap, 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 becoming one single glowing key that hummed like the beginning of a song. He placed it in the first lock. Click. He placed it in the second. Click. He placed it in the third. The doors of the library of all stories swung open. Warm golden light poured out like the inside of the doors had been saving it for 400 years. The smell that came with it was extraordinary. Old paper and new paper and ink and leather and something else entirely. Something Ember couldn't name except that it felt like the smell of every good feeling at once. Curiosity and wonder and warmth and the satisfaction of turning the last page of the most wonderful book you have ever read. Books. The library of all stories was open again. For the first time in 400 years. The light was on inside. Word spread fast. It always does, when something truly wonderful happens. Within a week, creatures had come from all over Oldoria. Children from the nearby villages, who had only ever read the few books their schoolhouses could afford, ran up the steps with their eyes enormous and their hearts pounding. Dragons from Ember's mountains came, grumbling and suspicious at first, until Crag accidentally opened a book about the history of dragon battles and couldn't put it down for 3 days. The Riddle Master came, and found the entire section of riddle books, and sat down on the floor right there and didn't move for a month. Even Mordrak came, very quietly, on the 3rd day, and sat alone in the corner with a book about feelings, and was seen, by a very small library mouse, crying, but in a good way. And Pip made the most detailed, most extraordinary map of the library's layout that had ever been drawn, which he printed and hung at the entrance so nobody would ever get lost among the shelves. Grandmother Ashwing came on the 7th day. She walked slowly up the steps, her great purple-grey wings folded, her moon eyes soft and shining. She found Ember sitting in a reading chair the size of a small house, deep in a book he had never seen before, one that had apparently been waiting 400 years for exactly the right reader. She sat down beside him. Older man Grandmother Ashwing. Well, young Ember. You did it. How does it feel? Dragon Ember, not looking up from his book. Amazing. Did you know that in a forest in the far south, there is a tree that grows books instead of leaves? Each leaf is a different story, and when autumn comes, they fall and drift to wherever in the world someone needs that particular story most. Older man Grandmother Ashwing, smiling. I did know that, actually. I read about it once. A very long time ago. Sharkanyambed. I want to find that tree someday. Older man Grandmother Ashwing. Of course you do. You always will. That is the thing about readers, you see. Every book they finish is also the beginning of the next adventure, because every story points to 100 more. Readers are never truly done. Ember turned a page. Outside the great windows of the library, the sky was the most brilliant blue he had ever seen, and somewhere out there, past the crystal forest and the whispering ravine and the mountains and the sea, were 1,000 stories he hadn't read yet, 1,000 worlds he hadn't visited, 1,000 truths waiting to be discovered. He smiled his warm, crackling campfire smile. He turned another page. Back in the blazing mountains, the other dragons had changed, too. Slowly, one by one, they had come to the library and found their own favorite books. Torch, the biggest, loudest dragon, discovered books about cooking, dragon cooking, with fires of different temperatures and intensities, and he became the most celebrated chef in all of Eldoria. Crag, who loved history, read everything ever written about ancient battles and became the greatest keeper of dragon history the mountains had ever known. They still breathed fire, of course. They still flew and stomped and collected gold. But now they also read. And somehow, in the way that truly wonderful things change you without you noticing until much later, they were kinder, and braver, and a little bit wiser than they had been before. The villagers around the mountains changed too. Once the library was open, the villagers and the dragons started talking, not because they had to, but because they were curious about each other. They had all read some of the same books, and nothing brings creatures together quite like saying, "Wait, did you cry at the end of chapter 7 too?" And Ember. Ember became the first keeper of the library of all stories, the first dragon librarian in the history of Eldoria. Every day he would help other creatures find the right book for the right moment. Every evening he would sit in his enormous reading chair and travel through pages to places he had never been and probably never would go, except in the best possible way. He was never lonely. He was never bored. He was never, for a single moment, out of adventures. Because he had books.